Strong winds and waves to the Great Lakes, in addition to any rain or snow that might develop. The storm that sunk the Edmund Fitzgerald was no different. The storm system that would ultimately be responsible for sinking the Edmund Fitzgerald was developing in central Kansas. This was occurring around the time that the Edmund Fitzgerald and the Arthur M. Anderson were getting ready to leave their ports. It was also around that time that the National Weather Service issued their first warning for the night, a gale warning. That was for winds expected to be around 45 knots or so. The captains both acknowledged that warning, two very experienced mariners at the helm of both ships. Now, that warning did cause them to take more of a northerly route across Lake Superior. They were hoping for some protection from those Canadian highlands to avoid the worst.
Revisiting the Fitz. According to Wikipedia, the Edmund Fitzgerald was an American Great Lakes freighter that sank during a Lake Superior storm on November 10th, 1975, with a loss of the captain and the crew of 29. When launched on June 7th, 1958, she was the largest ship on North America's Great Lakes, and she remained the largest to have sunk there. The Fitz was named after Edmund Fitzgerald, the president and chairman of the board of the Assure Northwestern Mutual. Much has changed since the Fitz was the queen of the Great Lakes. Take navigation, for instance. Most navigators use a dead reckoning system based on accurately recording the speed of the vessel and the exact heading and time. Now, this was well before global positioning systems, or GPS. And of course, previous to that, there's been several other navigation systems. They mainly consisted of lighthouses, buoys, you may call them buoys, markers, ranges, lights, and radar. Although Captain McSorley reported that the radar that night was inoperable, and all except radar, of course, require visual contact. Newer investigation methods at the time was to triangulate radio transmissions. The system was called LORAN, or Long Range Navigation, and relied on special radio transmissions. On the night of November 10th, 1975, the Fitz was on Lake Superior heading towards Whitefish Bay. She was captained by, of course, Ernest McSorley, a captain with decades of experience on the bridge. The weather was described as the worst in anyone's memory. There were stories attributed to First Nations people that the winter gales common to Lake Superior never gave up their dead, or in other words, the bodies of those perished will never be found. In the almost 40 years since the tragedy, much has changed in the shipping industry. We have much more accurate forms of navigation, such as GPS and others. It is said that the radio beacon for the LORAN to pick up was not operable, perhaps putting the Fitz off course and possibly near a dangerous shoal, also known as a shallow area. Hi, I'm Alan Stokel, and this is Grampian Marine and Budget Boat Cruising, the channels that chronicle the best and worst in boating. We don't really know to this day what happened as the Fitz sank without making a mayday or emergency call. The weather that night was horrid, with 40-foot waves and gale force winds of 11 to 12 point on the Beaufort scale. We'll explore each one, and then I'll tell you which one I subscribe to. How about the faulty hatch covers that caused massive internal flooding? In 1977, the U.S. Coast Guard stated that The sinking was caused by massive, slow, and unnoticed flooding of the cargo hold as a result of faulty or poor fastening of the hatch cover. This caused an imperceptible but fatal buoyancy loss and sent the Fitzgerald to the bottom. The ship had no depth sounding technology, and the crew had no way of knowing that incoming water was pushing the ship down. The National Transportation Safety Board, a year after the Coast Guard issued its report, somewhat agreed that non-weather tight hatch covers probably caused flooding during the trip. But the board ultimately concluded the probable sinking cause was sudden massive flooding of the cargo hold due to the collapse of one or more hatch covers. The heavy seas overwhelmed a ship that had already lost freeboard, or the distance from the sea to the deck, and was listing, or tipping, to one side. Contributing factors noted were a lack of internal watertight bulkheads and a heavier cargo weight than the ship's 17 years afloat. But more on that later. Did the Fitz hull take a fatal blow on that shoal? The Great Lake Carriers Association theory seemed to be the most popular among the mariners and armchair wreck investigators. The LCA thinks the Fitzgerald grounded on 6 Fathom Shoal northwest of Caribou Island, causing the fatal damage to the bottom of the hull. If the ship had hogged upon striking the shoal, it could have been caused by hatch cover damage reported by Fitzgerald's captain, McSorley, in the hours before the sinking. Later, divers found no new damage to the shoal after the wreck, and the ship's exact course could only be estimated as a result of the Fitzgerald's radar were inoperable. A retired Michigan Tech University professor postulated a seiche caused the ship to scrape the bottom of the Superior Shoal earlier that morning and weakened the hull that eventually gave out. So was the ship turtled by a rogue wave? In the year 2000, author Hugh Bishop pushed the Three Sisters theory about a trio of rogue waves that overwhelmed the Fitzgerald and it sank quickly. In a 2010 television program simulating the effect of a 56-foot wave on a scale model of the Fitzgerald. The closest boat to the Fitzgerald was the Arthur M. Anderson. The Anderson was captained by Jesse B. Cooper. He said the waves, which rolled over his ship and continued on towards the Fitzgerald. I've often wondered whether these two particular seas might have been the ones that finally did in the Fitz, because they were really huge, he said. Well, what do I think? Well, each theory has its own merits. So let's take a quick look at what we know for sure. We know the Fitz was overloaded. The gale force winds were creating huge waves. We know this. Taking a wave from the stern can overturn a boat. And the Fitz is no different. It may explain why the Fitz never sent a mayday call. It also must have sunk quickly. Captain McSorley himself had radioed the Anderson that almost all his bilge pumps were not working. In other words, the water that was coming in was not being pumped out. A series of huge rogue waves could easily sink a boat that was already overloaded full of water, losing freeboard and with a hull full of cracks from constant overuse and under-maintenance. A disaster that's just waiting to happen. Who should be held responsible for the sinking and the death of 29? Just about everyone involved except those 29 on board who paid for their profiteers' greedy and dishonesty with their lives. I'm Alan Stokel. Please leave a comment, or better still, give thumbs up and subscribe. It'll cost you nothing, but it helps me with my YouTube status.